Let's see here, Firery, I think.
Like that one either. Okay. That's why you have a dictionary.
That's why you can also Google it on your phone.
I tried.
I know. Mom, that is how, oh, it's spelled F-E-R-Y. Yes. Hi, good morning. Quentin, I don't know if you saw, did you just get an email just now?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, let's see what they end up doing, because I know that several of you have been asking this, but I had to get a screenshot showing what you were getting with regards to when you tried to apply or update, because they don't understand what you're seeing. And I don't get it because I'm not a student. So that was vital that they finally get that, because it's not a problem that I can solve. If it was, I definitely would have solved it by now. I would have solved it the first week, because if it's frustrating for you, it's frustrating for me too. One other thing that I need to say is recognize that if you do have access to that book is not loading, or you don't have access to the McGraw-Hill book, you have access to the assignments, but you don't have access to the McGraw-Hill book, that's a pop-up blocker. If you have access to them, but you can't get access to the book, that's a pop-up blocker. And I don't know enough about computers to be able to tell you how to resolve that issue. And especially if you're working with a Mac, because I don't know anything about Macs. If you're working with an Apple device, I don't know anything about Apple devices. I have an Apple phone, and it's the smallest phone available, because I don't want a bigger phone because they make me crazy. So if this is going on, you have to call, if for some reason, if you have access to the book, but you can't make something load, you have to call the IT tech people. And I can give you their phone numbers again. If you call them and you're on hold, everyone gets put on hold when they call an IT tech company. Everyone. I can tell you, even as a professor, when I call hack IT tech, I'm not put at the front of the line. I'm still on hold as they try to, as eventually someone gets to me. Because we are working with real people. And I mean, I can honestly tell you that if you think it's hard to be put on hold, imagine what it's like to be put on with an automated system, where they try to resolve your issues through yes or no problems, which all of us know those things stink. So I understand the frustration, but I also don't have any way of resolving it except to give the people who can resolve it the information they need, which is what Quentin Anderson gave to me last night that I just emailed out this morning. And if she comes back and she says, well, this isn't the right screenshot for me, I'll have to have one of you send me the right screenshot. I don't know what I don't know what she's looking for either. But I do understand the frustration at the same time. I'm a little frustrated. I'm really quite frustrated, and my roommate knows that we're 3 weeks into the semester, and some of you don't have access to books you paid for. And that's really frustrating to me, as it probably is to you also. So please be patient and recognize that's what's going on. I will extend out the deadlines. I need to figure out how to do it with the Wiley books. I know how to do it really easy with McGraw-Hill. I don't know how to do it with the Wiley books. But because your pages don't load, that's an issue that you have to resolve with an IT tech. Once you resolve it, it's usually resolved for the rest of the semester. But your computer may update itself regularly and put that pop-up blocker right back on. And possibly because they're going to walk you through how to get it off, you'll learn how to get it off yourself and disable it.
You didn't get up.
I'm good, Grandma.
Huh?
I'm just resting.
You want some food? I bring some?
Yeah, what's there to eat?
Huh?
What's there to eat?
I don't know what there is. I didn't eat anything yet.
So we have to call IT for access to the labs.
You're muted, Mary.
When did she say lab 3 and 4 is due? Does anybody know?
I think. Oh no, was it due yesterday?
Baby's kind of straight legs.
Mary, we can't hear you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Jamie just asked about when things are due.
Yeah.
That exercise was due last night.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, I understand. I will extend it out because we've got students who can't access the book at all right now. And so we've got to be able to extend it out because it's not their fault and it's not my fault that they can't access the stupid textbook. And I didn't call it stupid.
Yeah. Well, while we're my lab 1 and 2 is done, but in Dropbox it shows that it's not done. But if you go into Wiley, like I'm trying to do it again, it shows that my grades and then it's done, but it doesn't
Jamie,
show it.
Can you send me a screenshot showing that it's done and what the grades are?
Yeah, I can do that then.
Send that to me and I'll update it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that I understand, and you're probably not the only one. If you go, let me tell you, if you go in and you do if it lets you into that exercises 3 and 4, because I think I opened it so that you should be able to do it anytime.
Okay, thanks.
It will probably tell you the same thing. It's not going to give you a grade because you're doing it late. Just send me a screenshot showing what your score was.
Okay.
So Mary, did you say we have to call IT to get into the labs?
Keisha, if it's because it's not loading, if you have access to it, if it's not asking for an access code, which I think is what you're showing me, is that it's just not loading.
Yeah, it's just a blank, white blank.
That's a pop-up blocker.
Okay.
I'm almost sure of it. I'm like, I can say I'm about 95% sure that's what it is. And
Okay.
I don't know how to disable them. But if you call IT Tech, and they may put you on hold. And it always stinks to be left on hold. But
Okay.
they may put you on hold. The Wiley Plus is open 24 hours a day.
Okay.
Hack, I think, is open 24 hours a day, except for Saturdays when they close at 8 at night. And so they may put you on hold because we are dealing with real people. I mean, it's it's an automated system initially, and then you're dealing with real people. And so that means that there's only a limited number of people who can work, and sometimes everyone's calling them at the same time. Right? And so just, be patient with them and recognize that that's the way it's happening. And if it's, if you send me a message and you say, look, they're not loading, it's 11 o'clock at night, that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to tell you to call IT Tech. But then I'll still take them late. I'm not going to dock you because they're late. First off, because a lot of it's a technological issue. So
Could-
are there other questions or concerns?
Yes. Could you tell us what we needed to have done? Because I really feel like I'm backtracking and going back in the same way that she's having these problems. And I'm going back into the lab and it's saying that I never did the lab, but then it's
Did
but then back in and I already did that. I remember the questions. I remember what I did.
Miranda, is this Miranda?
Yes.
Miranda, are you one of them who does, I have to remember who doesn't have access and who has access.
I
Do you have,
shot, yeah, of the Wiley, and it wanted me to sign up and put my name in. And
okay, so you don't have access to it right now. And you're one of them who doesn't have access.
Yes.
Let me first get this issue resolved. I just sent the person at let me answer your first question. So the assignments for lab that are due that have been due so far are the lab exercises 1 and 2A, lab exercises 1 and 2B, and lab exercises 3 and 4.
Okay.
And the McGraw-Hill that are due so far are, bear with me here, the chapter 1 practice, the chapter 1 quiz, and the smart book chapter 1.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we will figure out why you don't have access. Because if she comes back and she says, well, I don't know why they don't have access either, I'm going to say, well, give us an access code that they can use. You've already paid for it. And either they need to give you your money back if you're going to pay for it again, or they need to figure out why you don't have it or give you an access code. And that will be my next email. Right now, I was nice. When I forwarded Quentin's screenshot, I told her that this is what the students are seeing when they try to access this book. Either we need an access code or we need the glitch resolved. And I said, can you please help us? My next email may not be as kind. So just be patient with me as I figure it out. And I'm sorry it's going on, but I didn't realize it was gonna be this hard, and I don't think the bookstore had any idea it was gonna be this awful. So be patient with us as we figure it out. And with regards to you, Miranda, you having done them, what it probably, and let me see if I can get them. Let me see if I can figure out how to get into the grades on Wiley. I can do it on McGraw-Hill. I don't know how to do it on Wiley yet. But let me get in there and see if I can find them. And if for some reason I can't find them when you have access again, Miranda, because you will have access again. When you have access again, send me a screenshot showing that you've completed them on Wiley. And I need, in that screenshot, I need it to show the scores and the assignment. Does that make sense?
Yes, screenshot
Yeah.
the scores and the assignment.
Yeah. And I mean, it happens with McGraw-Hill sometimes. You will have done it and the grade for some odd reason doesn't transfer over into D2L. And it's great for the most part, but every once in a while it happens. But I will figure out the issues. Other questions or concerns?
It's saying in my D2L gradebook that I didn't do the chapter 1 practice, but I actually did it multiple times. So
Bear with me just for a quick moment here, okay? You don't see my screen yet, so I'm just gonna look. Give me one moment here.
and I was looking and it said that I didn't do lab exercises 1 and 2A, but I did A and then B as
That's the one where I need you to send me a screenshot.
well. Okay.
Let me see if I can't just see yours on the chapter 1 practice. Bear with me just for a moment here. Okay. Was this Ashley who said that it was, you did it multiple times and it didn't bring up a score?
No, it was Genesis.
I'm sorry, Genesis. Give me a second here. Okay, Genesis, it's not giving you a score here. Can you send me a screenshot of your score?
Since it's the practice one, it doesn't like give me a score. It
It
just says
should
the
give you a
date.
score. It should give you a score.
Okay, well then can I do it again, I guess? Since it's
Yes,
not giving me
do it
one.
again. Listen to me here for a second. Do it again. And before you're done, call the IT tech people
Okay.
and say, look, I've done this assignment multiple times. It's not showing up in the McGraw-Hill grade, excuse me, the McGraw-Hill grades for my professor. It's not transferring over to D2L either.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize. That's not fun. Other issues? Okay. Your first lab quest is going to open up this afternoon. I think I set it up so it opens at 12 p.m. It's going to be timed. And I'm trying to remember how many questions it has. I think it has like 32 questions. And you have about 85 minutes or 83 minutes to take it.
And when is that due?
It's going to be due next week at midnight. Next next Wednesday night at midnight.
Okay.
Other,
Real quick.
and that will cover, that's gonna cover lab exercises 1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
I have a question real quick then.
Go ahead.
I can't finish this lab.
Oh, the virtual lab thing, that gave me a hard time too.
No.
I mean, I did. Oh, okay. I just
Sorry.
but-
No, this the lab, the what is it? Which one? The B?
The smart book.
No, not the smart book. The 1 and 2B, the lab.
Okay, what is it giving you?
One of these problems, like it keeps saying that I'm wrong and I don't know how I'm wrong. Can I share my screen with you?
Yeah, give me 1 second, all right?
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Hmm. Sorry, give me a second.
Are you the one who likes to be called Cat?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Gastric.
Can you see this?
Yep, I can.
I don't know why it keeps saying that I'm wrong.
It did that exact same thing to me too. I just skipped it because I was getting so aggravated.
Well, like I can't skip it without it being saying done, right? Like it won't.
It won't let you just submit it even if it's wrong.
No.
Oh, it did me. It let me skip it.
It keeps making me try and like.
Where's the option to skip it?
Just up at the top where it says 14 out of 38, just click the arrow.
Yeah, I mean I can skip it, but then it's still like.
Just skip it. You know what, Cat?
Do I still have a
Skip-
grade for this
Skip
then?
it. And if it's only 0.2 points, recognize that I'm gonna round up.
Okay.
Don't, bear with me just for a moment here, Kat. I'm gonna look at something really quick.
Hmm.
One more, let's do this. Oh, you're, okay, I'm gonna can you stop sharing just for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait, you know what? I just saw your score. So you got 5 out of 5 for it.
Oh.
Yeah. If you go into D2L, give me one moment here. Content cards. Second here. Oh, don't do that. Was 3 and 4. Oh, that was 1 and 2. Okay, that was 1 and 2A. Okay, Jamie, you also got 5 out of 5 for that one too.
Okay.
And
And which one was that?
that was the 1 and 2A. The other one is the one that I think no, that, bear with me. Yeah, that was the 1 and 2A.
Okay.
Kat, where's your score? See, it's not even, oh no, I updated your score last night, Kat. So you got a 5 out of 5 on that.
Okay. On the 1 and 2B.
On the 1 and 2B, you also will get a 5 out of 5. I just haven't updated it yet.
Oh, okay. All right.
I have to go in there and manually round those up.
Oh, okay. I just
Other-
wasn't seeing a score for it, so I didn't know if I had to finish that last problem for me to
No,
get
don't, just be done with it.
Okay.
If it keeps telling you, you know it's correct, and it's not letting you, it's 0.2 points, and I'm gonna round up anyway.
I remember that question. You had to like type out the whole entire thing. There's like a super long name for the I don't remember which one it is exactly, but there's like super long names for them. You have to type the
Really?
whole thing out. Yeah, me and my mom literally were sitting at the table with this question for like 20 minutes trying to figure it out.
Okay.
And finally my mom is like, try to type the whole thing in, like the whole entire name. And yeah, so we actually looked it up and
If
had to
it's,
type out
if
the
it's,
whole thing.
who's this talking?
Genesis.
Genesis, if it's that awful, just skip it. Don't mess with something, especially when it's worth that little, and just recognize that I'm gonna round up.
Okay.
Other questions or concerns? Be patient with me about the book. Nope, that was someone else. So I think that's a student in my second class. Is Kevin Powell in this class? I don't think he is. No, he's not. We'll figure it out. But so that's the issue. Give her a minute to resolve that. If she comes back and she says, okay, they have access now, and you send me a screenshot and you don't have access again, I'm just gonna ask her for the access code. I'll probably be nice about it, maybe, but I'm just gonna ask her for an access code. Other issues? Okay, I have a mini PowerPoint here that's going to talk about transport through cell membranes. This is what some of this is going to be a preview of what's coming in chapter 3. Actually, most of it's a preview of what's coming in chapter 3. Which means that by the time we get to chapter 3, you'll all be pros. But I want to go through this PowerPoint, and then we are behind in lecture. And I think part of it is the technological difficulties that we're having. And so I'm going to go through the PowerPoint for the lab. And then I want to spend some time with the PowerPoint lecture, and then I'll let you go. Any questions? Oh, I don't want to share my screen just yet. Mom? Mom? Give me one moment, all right? I just thought of something. Give me one moment. So that exercise 5 is titled Transport Across the Plasma Membrane, or Transport Across Membranes. The plasma membrane can you see my screen? Nope.
No.
Okay, give me a second. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. The plasma membrane, Mom? Nope, that's my cat over there. The plasma membrane of the cell, this is the outer cell membrane that is essentially just is the boundary of the cell that, bear with me here. It is the boundary dividing the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell. The intracellular fluid is within the cell. The extracellular fluid, if you think like extraterrestrial life somewhere outside of the earth, extracellular fluid, meaning outside of the cell. I took care of it. I turned on the water pot. I'm going to show them something here in a moment. Is a thin bilayer of lipids. And so lipids meaning oil or fats with proteins dispersed in it. It looks like a constant mosaic that is constantly changing. The inside of the membrane and the proteins within it are tethered to the cytoskeleton. We have cholesterol in the membrane that can change the fluidity. Let me back up just for a second. So we talked about it being a thin layer of this lipid molecule, and it's a bilayer. So it's 2 layers of lipids with the fatty acid parts being directed towards the inside and phosphate heads being directed towards the outside. Here's our phosphate head. Here's our fatty acid tails. Here's cholesterol. Also, that's way too small. So thin layer with composed of 2 layers. So this boundary composed of 2 layers, and these 2 layers are able to slip by one another. If you think like if you've ever seen those bouncy balls where there's another ball within that ball, and the one inside can slide by the ball, the most outer ball. That's what this looks like. some of it is not as movable as other parts because it also has these proteins. And we have proteins that are on the periphery that are periphery, meaning just on the edges and right outside. And we have transmembrane proteins that go all the way through. We also have glycolipids and glycoproteins. I'm trying to remember if we talked about this or not. Did we talk about what glyco meant?
Yes, it means sugar.
It means sugar, correct. So a glycolipid is a sugar attached to a lipid. A glycoprotein is a sugar or a attached to a protein. When in science, when we talk about sugars, we refer to them as carbohydrates. So anytime that you see this little 6-ring structure, and just for kicks, anytime that you see this 6-ring structure,
Did you wash these before you put them in the fridge?
I don't know, probably not. Anytime that you see this 6-ringed structure on anything, it's gonna be a carbohydrate. Just a universal sign of being a carbohydrate / sugar. So the basic fabric of the plasma membrane, composed of unsaturated phospholipids, which I think we'll talk about the next time we meet in lecture, small amounts of cholesterol, glycoproteins and glycolipids. And if you notice, the glycolipids and the glycoproteins are only found on the outside of the membrane. They're not found on the
His
inside.
nurse that's with him. His vitals are still fine. He's stable. He's still sleeping. Once he starts waking up, they'll come get us.
And transmembrane proteins, meaning the proteins that go all the way through the membrane. And peripheral proteins that are just on one side of the membrane or the other side of the membrane.
Yes, he's probably hungry.
This membrane is what we call semi-permeable, meaning that some things can move in and out of the membrane and other things cannot. Molecules that are, bear with me, molecules that are easily water soluble do not move through very easily. Okay, we did talk about this. Do you remember we talked about what it means to be polar? When a molecule is polar? What does it mean when a molecule is polar? Someone tell me, what does it mean when a molecule is polar? Okay, I'm gonna
I
run.
guess
Go ahead.
one end is positive and the other end is negative.
Right, good job. Right, exactly. So one end has a partial positive charge, one end has a partial negative charge. Good job. Who was that?
Michaela.
Michaela, good job. Ions, remember those are the charged atoms. And other charged molecules and large hydrophilic molecules. Hydrophilic meaning, what does hydro mean? Any guesses?
Water.
Water. And philic means loving. So these are molecules that love water. They love water. Large hydrophilic molecules are unable, so all things that have a charge, are polar, or easily dissolve in water are not going to be able to cross this bilayer. Small polar molecules may be able to cross every once in a while, like water. But most big, large proteins, charged molecules, polar molecules, are going to be unable to cross. Well, how do they cross if they can't easily just pass through the membrane? If they don't easily cross, they can either be moved via a channel or a carrier protein, which is not shown here. And some may never be able to cross. Depending on how big it is, some may never be able to cross because it may be something that isn't supposed to be in the cell. Or other proteins may need to stay in the cell, and that's why they never cross. Your organelles are going to be too big to be able to move across. When things cross, there's two different ways that things can easily cross. Well, let's not say easily. Two ways that things easily cross through a membrane. Things can move or diffuse across a membrane without any energy input from the cell. The driving force here is the inherent kinetic energy of those molecules. So all molecules, the molecules in your body, the molecules in the air, all have an inherent energy. They all vibrate a little bit. Unless we go down to the lowest energy level, which is what we call 0 Kelvin, which we won't talk about in this class. But what that means is that there's absolutely no temperature. There's no heat. Unless we get down to that, which is very, very difficult to do. You can only do it with specialized machinery. All molecules have some inherent energy from the temperature and the heat of the environment. And with this inherent temperature or heat, they easily move. And they don't really move with any given direction, but they move from a high to a low. Let me give you an example. And this is kind of a grody example, but it's a good example. Right now we're dealing with the COVID variant, and as much fun as it is. And we wear this face mask when we're outside. Why do we wear the face mask? Why do they want us to wear these?
Because COVID is transmitted through the droplet.
Right. And so when you breathe or when you sneeze, hopefully it gets stuck in the mask, right? Any little droplets that could potentially spread COVID get stuck within the mask. Now, let's pretend we're not wearing a mask, and trying to think, I don't want to pick on somebody for this because it's kind of a gross example. well, I'll pick on myself. So I'm not wearing a mask. I go out and I sneeze. And of course, because I've never learned any manners, I don't cover my nose, but I sneeze. I sneeze. And does it stay right next to my nose? Everything that I just sneezed out, all those little droplets that I just sneezed out, does it stay right next to my nose?
No.
It doesn't. It even though, you don't think there's some energy there, but it doesn't stay right next to my nose. It keeps moving out. It would be great if it stayed right next to my nose. Why do they say to social distance?
Because the droplets spread around you.
Yeah, because the droplets will essentially stop spreading and stop moving out. The boundary of where they'll continue to move, and then they stop moving is approximately 6 feet. So this is diffusion. This diffusion of droplets, which is the inherent kinetic energy, which the movement is the inherent kinetic energy of those molecules. This is passive transport. When we sneeze like that, it's a passive transport. And the driving force is the inherent kinetic energy within those substances. That they move from where it's most concentrated to where it's least concentrated. So the reason it doesn't stay right next to my nose is because it's less concentrated farther away from my nose. So it's a concentration gradient. Things are moving from a high to a low. So active movement is where energy is required to move things across the membrane. And things are moving from a low to a high. So they're going against the gradient. And this requires some active energy put into it to make them move this way. So this is active transport. Diffusion can occur either through just diffusing through the membrane without a carrier or a channel, or it can move via a channel or a carrier, or in active transport, it's being pumped using energy breakdown. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay. We talked a little bit about this in the first chapter, but this is very important here, and it's an overall theme to anatomy and physiology, mainly physiology. That there is a difference in the chemical concentration, charge, or pressure between 2 points. Anytime that's the case, there's a gradient. And energy and matter passively flow down the gradients, aka passive transport. Everything, unless you force it not to, everything moves from a high to a low all the time. Active movement in the opposite direction is up the gradient. and it requires the spending of metabolic energy or active transport to occur. We have a couple different types of gradients. We have concentration gradients, or chemicals or neutral chemicals can flow down a concentration gradient. Or we have charged particles that can flow down an electrical gradient, or in the case of particles that are dissolved that are also charged, we call these electrochemical gradients. These are a lot of times, these electrochemical gradients are ions. We also have heat flows. So if you put a radiator in the middle of the room and it gets really warm, you turn on the radiator, turn on the heater, and it takes a few minutes for the outside, the periphery of the room to get warm at all, right? Because where is the heat where's the highest amount of heat? Is it out at the periphery, or is it next to the heater? I know you guys know. It's right next to the heater.
The heater?
Yeah, it's right next to the heater. So heat moves from a high concentration to a lower concentration. This passive movement down a gradient is what we call diffusion. Bear with me just for a second. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a second here. I have some water. I'm going to move my it so I don't run the risk of splashing water on my laptop. But I have this water right here. You see any color in it?
No.
Okay, so there's no color in it. I'm going to add some color to it. You see the color in it. Does it stay right where I first dropped it in?
No. No.
Is
What is it doing?
diffusing.
It's diffusing. How is it diffusing? What direction is it diffusing? Is it diffusing in a specific direction?
No, not specifically. Just down.
Or is it down, or is it to the sides? Is it down to the sides and really everywhere?
Looks
It
like it's
will-
down to the sides, but it looks like it's floating, like it's trying to stay separated between the two. Oh,
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah, you're right. It's going to continue to move until the dye concentration in the whole container is equal. It's going to continue to move. You're right. It's kind of sunk to the bottom a little bit too, and that's just based on the weight of the dye. But it's going to continue to move until the dye concentration is equal throughout. So it's randomly moving, but it's randomly moving from a high to a low concentration. So this is just a normal everyday physical property. Also, things across a permeable membrane passively diffuse down their gradients. So things are, just like a membrane, if they can move through the membrane, they're going to move down the gradient from a high to a low. And they're going to move randomly, but they're moving randomly, but they're moving from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. Let me give you one more example. Let's pretend we're in a classroom here. And in this classroom, actually, let me draw it. It's better. In this classroom, am I sharing my screen yet? I am. Let me stop sharing just one more time. I wanted. Okay, there's my bar. Let's stop sharing. So let's pretend we're in a classroom. We're in a classroom that's attached to another classroom. And there's a divider. With a couple doors. We're in this side of the classroom. And we're in this classroom, and let's say, we'll say it's like 5 by, no, let's give us a little bit more space. We'll say it's 7 by 7. So maybe the typical size of a walk-in closet. And I think in our class altogether, we have about 25 people. In this other classroom that we're attached to, there's one person. So this is a 7 by 7 classroom. This is a 7 by 7 classroom. How many of us are going to try to move into the other classroom if we're allowed? If this room is 7 by 7, and there's 25 of us in here, and there's only one person in this classroom, how many of us are going to try to move out of this classroom?
A lot of us.
A lot of us. I think very few of us are actually going to try to stay in that classroom. We're going to keep moving into this other classroom until we're equally dispersed between the two. Because I know I'm not a very claustrophobic person, but I can't imagine being in a 7x7 room with 25 people. That's diffusion. We're going to randomly move until we're not in this room. If we can see the doors like we can as humans, we're going to go towards the doors. But if we can't see, let's say it's dark and there's no light, we're going to randomly move until we're equally dispersed between the two rooms. We don't have to move with any general direction. We're just going to move so that we're not highly concentrated in one room. So this, if the membrane or the doorway, if we're separated by this other classroom by a wall, if we can move through the wall and easily to just diffuse through the layer, that's simple diffusion. Substances like oxygen, which is nonpolar, carbon dioxide, which is little polar but very small, and fat-soluble vitamins, meaning they're very hydrophobic. They dissolve in fat, but they don't dissolve in water. Easily diffuse through the membrane. This is simple diffusion. If the molecules can't diffuse through the membrane, we may require what's called facilitated diffusion, which means that we move down our concentration gradient, but we have to use carrier proteins that we can bind to, or we have to use channels that have a big enough opening that we can go through. There are some channels that are always a little open, and there are also what's called gated channels that require a change in the electrical charge gradient, or they require a chemical signal to open or to close. Most often to open. Any questions so far? So simple diffusion is when things can just diffuse across the membrane. Facilitated diffusion is when things require a carrier or a channel. Osmosis is the diffusion of water. from its high concentration to a lower concentration of water. So this is water moving down its concentration gradient. That's key here. So all things move from a high to a low. Unless you put an energy force into it and prevent it, all things move from a high to a low. Let me see. All things are from a high to a low. That includes water. So if you look up here, so I'll picture right here, you see there's little solute molecules in there. And it's separated by a membrane that's permeable to water, but it's not permeable to the solute. Solute meaning things that are dissolved in the water. If these two sides are equal in volume, which side has more water? The left or the right? If the volume is equal on both sides, solute takes up space. Anything, any matter has a mass. It takes up space. Therefore, there's more water on this side than there is on this side if these volumes are equal. And water flows to the right.
I'm sorry, which side had more water?
The left side. Let me give you another example. Oh, let's do it like this. And yes, this is crappy drawing. However, let's pretend that this volume in here equals this volume in here. So there's water filling both sides. They're separated by a membrane right here. That allows water through, but not other things. So in this side, I put a little bit of, let's change the colors. A little bit of that stuff in there. They're all this stuff that I'm writing in here are equal, they're equal in size. And in this side, these little red things that I'm drawing, these are all things that are dissolved in the water. If these two sides are equal in volume, this has 1 liter. This has 1 liter. Which side has more water?
side with less particles in it?
The side with less particles in it has more water. What that means is that water is going to flow from the right to the left until the water concentration over here is equal to what it was over here. And then they'll flow equally in both directions.
What will that do to the particles? Will that change the particles?
No, because the particles still can't move through the membrane.
Okay.
If you understand that, that's the most difficult part of understanding osmosis, is recognizing that water, rather than particles moving like diffusion or other kinds of diffusion, the water is moving down its concentration gradient. It's moving from where there's a high amount of water to an area where there's a lower amount of water. Let's take 10 minutes right here and get up and move, okay? And we'll come back to right here. Or for myself. I tell you that as I'm slowly becoming, trying to be a better morning person, that I was well, you know, the second school ends, I'll take it, have a balance one. It won't last. What? What'd you say? I'm trying to remember how. What temperature it's for. Roasting. Oh. Woo-hoo. Yes. Quinoa salad, cheesesteak. We have more people on our workforce sick. Always have a whole- It's all well, and yeah, I heard it. So there's how much wants families to have? You're asking. Biol says he's just grateful that COVID can't smoke the cats. Yeah. One of the families that they didn't need to be immunized. They were really healthy and they were protected and they didn't need to be immunized. So they got the COVID.
Well, they got the variant. Then they got the variant, yes, Mary. You may see that in the background. Wow. Just, and over and over, they said, take advantage of the science that's out there to protect your health. In other words, healthies.
When we talk about RNA class, I'm gonna tell them about that. Everyone is so afraid of this. But if you think about how unstable mRNA is, that's
Or messenger or.
yeah, any RNA, it's not a stable.
What did you drink?
I mean, you can figure out why it would
You want to get my attention
Why
for some reason.
you can understand why it's such a pain in the butt to make a vaccine.
Okay, out we go, guys. Out we go. That's a problem.
But it's just not, it's not stable.
Okay, where's the kid?
She's on the couch. I'll get on. It's not,
It's already pressed.
it's not stable, so it's not like your body's not gonna break it down really quite quickly, because you have RNA, so their body doesn't break it down. So you can imagine why it took a long time to develop. Because I mean, I'm sure that the second the pandemic started, someone was looking for creating a vaccine.
Well, they've been working on RNA vaccines for over 30 years.
Well, you can
So
understand
there's
why
just-
it's so hard to do.
So that all of a sudden, you use all that technology.
But I mean, there was such a pull to make it wrong, because there's been such a push. to go into it.
Oh, that's new.
Like,
Yeah,
so,
it was this big one. I thought that was small. What's that?
he's excited, I'm sure. He's still running.
Oh, he could run it. He's using a different outlet.
Okay, so the air conditioner is causing
He's draining water into the wall. And that's coming down here. It's also enabled the outlet. That's what it's-
lucky us.
Sure about that. But Matt said he was out buying this light as we speak.
When was that? Is he gonna come in the middle of my class? Just warn me he's gonna come in the middle of his and I'll figure it out.
That's not his fault. Why I always forget to take the olive oil out.
This is.
Your fault, Mary.
What? What'd you say?
I said, I don't know why I always forget to take the olive oil out to thaw. But it's your fault.
Oh, as long as it's my fault. We're good with that.
I think Robert's.
Professor, how many cats do you have?
I have 3 cats. This is not a cat. This little one right here. Give me 1 second, I'll stop sharing. Do you
Oh,
see
look
her?
at her.
Say hi. Say, I'm the teaching assistant who sleeps on the lap during class.
Cute. I love her ears.
Yeah. Say, I'm Paisley. Huh.
I always hear you yelling at somebody. And that's how I am. Half the lecture, I'm yelling at my cat, Mr. Business.
Mr. Business is his name?
Yeah, he's a tux cat.
That's awesome.
I can't ever find him half the time, but he pops up out of nowhere playing with his brother.
How old is he?
They're kittens. I got them together. They're brothers. I have 2 of them.
How old are they?
They're, I want to say 7, 8 months.
Oh, they're still babies.
Yeah, we got them in May, like around 5 months.
Wow,
Okay, he's walking away already.
that's really fun.
And they're both, one's a tux and the other one's black.
Say one is what?
Tux cat, a tuxedo kitty.
Oh, cool.
Can we see them?
You see them? Let me go see if I can find Mr. Business real quick. He's comes to food. He's fat. He's the fat kitty.
Here, I'll see if I can grab one of mine. They're both in my room right now.
Oh, I see the one back there.
This is Simon.
Oh, Simon, hi. Put his face a little closer.
Here he is.
Oh, he's pretty. He's a Maine Coon. Look
Yeah,
at
we
that little
think
boy.
we rescued him, so it's hard to tell.
He's a Maine Coon. He's a Maine Coon mix.
Yeah, and then I have another one who is definitely a Maine Coon. He's down here on the floor. Oh, come here.
Oh,
He
wow.
is way bigger than the other one. This one's
Wow. Look
yeah.
at that. Look.
Ooh,
Have you heard of the Siberian
Forrest.
forest cats?
no, I haven't.
You should see if they have a mix of that one, especially that one right there, that gray one.
I'll look it up right now.
Look him up because I don't know, I think they have to be related to Maine Coons.
I definitely think the gray one is. My friend has 2 Maine Coons, and the gray one looks exactly like her gray one.
Really?
Yeah, he's just a little bit smaller than them.
But I think that orange one is it too. You can see it in the tops off the ears.
Yeah, because it comes to a point.
I have a farm.
But he's kind of small, so he's probably mixed with just like a domestic cat, a normal
Well,
cat.
I
my
have a
little
pharmacy like that. He's like 15 pounds. That looks like him, and he just roams the land. His name's Lucifer.
He's probably a Maine Coon.
Yeah, we call him Lucifer.
That's funny.
We call him
Oh yeah,
Louis when we
Arden
take.
does look like this Siberian forest cat.
Here's Mr. Biz.
Oh, how
Oh,
cute.
As a
Oh,
boat.
how cute.
He's mad at me right now because I tricked him with treats.
He's medium haired. He's not short haired, is he?
He's long haired, they said.
I
Short hair. His brother's silky and he's like a flat. Like he's like
put his face right up here. Put his face. Hi, buddy. Look up. I think he's more medium. I think he's more medium.
and he's all fuzzy. He just
He's
has
very cute. So
his toes.
is the brother short haired?
The brother is short hair. He's all black except for his chest.
Oh, wow. How pretty is that?
Yeah, they're cute. They're bad. They play together. His name is Coco. I got them for my stepson,
Yeah.
and he just adores them.
And your mother's cat is named Lucifer?
My farm cat from like when I was growing up in high school, I got this cat. I found him at Coleman's Park in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And he looks like a full Maine Coon kitty. Like
Wow.
he's 15 to 20 pounds. Like he's bigger than our Shih Tzu.
Wow.
And our Shih Tzu's like a pretty big size Shih Tzu for even a Shih Tzu.
Wow. My one cat who is 14 now is a Maine Coon mix, and he was always really, really tiny. He was 9.5 pounds. And then about a year ago, a little over a year ago, he almost died. He got down to 6.5 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Before I recognized, because I'm kind of slow on the uptake a lot of times.
They have a lot of hair.
Yeah, but Leo, come here, buddy. Leo, my boy, come here. Quick, come here, buddy. He says, do you really think I'm going to come when you call?
Yeah.
Leo, Mom, can you grab him for me? Yeah. Oh, there you are. Come here, buddy. Come here.
This is his new favorite spot.
I know it is.
Come here, you.
Come here.
Have the wrong mommy. Okay, come on. In a minute, he'll start swearing at me.
He will start swearing at you, yes.
That was his comment to Paisley.
Okay, move Paisley so he doesn't gouge her.
He's a big boy.
So this is Leo, and Leo is 14 years old
Oh, wow.
and 14 pounds now. So I told you he was always kind of small. He was 9.5. I've had him since he was about, 8 weeks old. And he was 9.5 pounds up until he was about 12.5 years old.
Oh, wow.
And then he went through this thing where he was eating all the time, but at the same time metabolizing all his muscles. And so he was breaking down all his muscles and eating all the time.
Yeah, I forget what that's called in like humans, but it's
Anorexia.
yeah.
Mom, what is it called? Catabolism. Yeah, we talked about that. We're going to talk about that. We'll talk about it with chapter 2. But what ultimately ended up was that he had inflammation of his intestines. And $2,000 later, I had him in. They did an ultrasound. I know. Tell me about it.
They were at 325 to neuter a kitten.
How much?
325. I found
Wow.
that'll do it for 55. And I know the clinic because I grew up, because I'm a farm girl. So like I know all the doctors and the back ways.
Yeah, you're a monster, but you're fun, huh? No, so he got down to about 8.5, got down to 6.5 pounds, about 6.25. He was losing what I weighed him one day, and he weighed 6.5 pounds.
Wow. Now he wants to be part of it.
Well, and yes, now you want to be part. You didn't want to be over here, but now you want to be part. And then then the next day they weighed him at the vets and he weighed 6.25. And so I took him to the pet ER in Towson, Maryland. They did an ultrasound and realized that the lining of his intestinal tract was double what it should be.
Oh, wow.
And so now he's on a special diet. And he weighs a very happy 14 pounds.
He's so cute.
Yeah.
I'm a monster. I should be named Lucifer. That's a good name.
That's what he looks like. He has that like colorings. Like he's a Maine Coon mix with something, but he definitely got like the long ears, the big old paws, like very long. He kills birds. He kills rats.
Wow.
We'll go after groundhog in a minute. I'm like, boy, you'll find out, because we didn't declaw him. We just neutered him.
Yeah.
So he runs the town. He knows what he wants. He doesn't even use a litter box. He goes outside. I trained him to go to the bathroom outside.
Wow. That's nice.
Yeah.
He knows to stay away from the road. He knows what's up.
Wow. All right, let's get back into this for a minute. So osmosis, the diffusion of water down its concentration gradient. Polar water, remember water is a polar molecule. So polar water can slip through gaps made through the random movements of the lipid tails of the membrane. However, its diffusion is facilitated. So facilitated diffusion of osmosis, or facilitated osmosis, is when water moves through aquaporins. If you think aqua is water, porins is in a pore, specific water channels in the membrane. Water moves depending on the water's osmolarity. This osmolarity is the total number of all the solute particles in one side of the membrane. Water will diffuse into a compartment until the hydrostatic pressure equals the osmotic pressure. Hydro meaning water, static meaning the push of the water pressure. So here I'm looking at this. Here's my solvent. We'll say solvent is water here. Bear with me just for a second here. I'm trying to think maybe this isn't the best diagram. Because here it's letting actually, no, it's still a good diagram. So hydrostatic pressure is the pressure that the pressure the water is exerting to move to a lower concentration of water. So this is the pressure that the water exerts to move to a lower concentration of water. Or it's the back pressure exerted by the water against the membrane. I think it's easier to just remember that it's the pressure that the water is exerting to move into an area of a lower concentration. So let me say that one more time. It's the pressure the water exerts to move to a lower concentration of water. Or let me put it one more way. The hydrostatic pressure is the pressure the water exerts to move to an area of a lower water concentration. So it's the pressure the water exerts to move to an area of lower water concentration. The osmotic pressure, and the best way to think of osmotic is the solute particles. The osmotic pressure is the pressure of the solute to resist water in entry. There's a certain amount of pressure exerted by the solute or the particles within the water to resist water movement into it.
I'm sorry, one more time for me, Professor.
Which one? The osmotic? The osmotic?
Yes.
Okay. The osmotic pressure is the pressure that the solute or the particles in the water exert to resist water entry into where they're at. The higher the amount of because it's the pressure because the osmotic pressure is the pressure exerted by the solute, the higher the amount of solute, the higher the osmotic pressure. So the osmotic pressure is the pressure exerted by the solute itself. The hydrostatic pressure is the pressure exerted by the water. The higher the osmotic pressure, the greater the hydrostatic pressure. And until they're both equal, water will continue to move towards its lower concentration. until the hydrostatic pressure equals the osmotic pressure, the net movement of water will be towards the lower concentration of solute. And one other way to put this, let's see if I have another slide. No, I don't. Let me come back up to this one. So the osmotic pressure here, I have water moving, right? Water is moving from a high concentration of water to a low concentration of water or solvent. Actually, that's a terrible example. Let me put it here. All right, I'm getting a lot of emails. And so at the very end, I'll read these emails to you about getting access to the manual. The higher, let's see here, bear with me. The more, the osmotic pressure, the greater the osmotic pressure, let's see, the osmotic pressure is the amount of pressure necessary to prevent the inflow of water into an area. So it's the amount of pressure required to resist water entry. Let me introduce a new term here, tonicity. This is the relative concentration of solutions. So this is solute concentrations, the relative solute concentrations of solutions that will determine the direction and extent of diffusion of the solvent. Tonicity is commonly used when describing the response of cells immersed in some sort of external solution. Tonicity is a relative term. The concentration of the solute may be higher on one side of the membrane relative to the other. So remember, this is a relative term. If, for example, I'm within a cell, the solute concentration that I'm looking out at, I'm inside this bubble, the concentration of the solute on the other side of the bubble is how I measure tonicity. If the solute concentration outside of this bubble, bear with me just for a second. Sure, for a moment. So I have a bubble. I have a balloon right here. We'll pretend it's a bubble. I'm sitting in the, there's a person inside the bubble, inside the balloon. This balloon, let's say instead it's a water balloon, so it's full of water and maybe some salt in there, some salt water in there. I take this balloon and I put it in a bunch of water. That's got maybe a little bit of salt in it. From the person's perspective who's in the balloon, the concentration of salt is less on the outside than it is on the inside, right? If I take this balloon, I fill it up with salt water, I stick a little person in there, little tiny minion, stick him in there. And then I stick this balloon into distilled water. Doesn't have any salt in it. Now the concentration of salt is much higher on inside the balloon. And I see that the concentration of salt is higher inside the balloon than it is in the environment that the balloon's in. That's the way we look at tonicity. So it's a relative term with regards to whatever's inside the cell. So the concentration may be higher on one side of a cell membrane relative to the other. So tonicity is an extracellular solution's ability to make water move into or out of the cell via osmosis. It's a measure of the effective osmotic pressure. I think osmosis, osmotic. The tonicity is an extracellular solution's ability to get water to move into or out of a cell via osmosis. If the solute on the outside of the cell is greater than the solute concentration on the inside of the cell, this is called hypertonic. Think like hyper as meaning something that's much more higher than what else is going on there. Whatever else is going on, if you think about a hyper child or a hyper kitten, it's much more, it's got a higher energy or a higher something than the surrounding environment. Hypotonic, meaning that the solute concentration is higher, but don't do that, buddy. Solute concentration is higher inside the cell than it is on the outside. And isotonic, meaning the same. Solute concentrations are the same on the outside and the inside. Now, with keeping it in mind that if the solute concentration is higher somewhere, the water concentration has to be less. And tonicity is the movement, is an osmosis is the movement of water from a high concentration of water to a lower concentration of water. So isotonic meaning the solute and water concentrations are equal on both sides of the membrane. When the solute concentrations are the same, the water concentrations are the same. Or there's going to be no net gain or loss of water by the cell. In a hypotonic solution, the concentration of solute is lower outside of the cell than inside of the cell, which means that the water concentration is higher outside of the cell than inside of the cell. And if the water concentration is higher outside of the cell, the water is going to flow into the cell. So let me say that one more time. If the solute concentration is lower outside of the cell, the water concentration has to be higher outside of the cell.
One more time again, please.
Okay. If the solute concentration is higher outside of the cell, that was reversing it. If the solute concentration is lower outside of the cell, then the water concentration has to be higher outside of the cell. And therefore, water will flow into the cell. Let me say it one more time. If the solute concentration outside of the cell is lower than inside of the cell, the water concentration is higher outside of the cell. Therefore, water is going to flow down its concentration gradient into the cell. The result is that cells in a hypotonic solution where the solute concentration is lower outside of the cell, those cells are going to swell. And this may cause animal cells, it doesn't work with plant cells, but it works with animal cells. It may cause animal cells to rupture or lyse. Hypertonic solutions are when the concentration of the solute is higher outside of the cell, and therefore the water concentration is lower outside of the cell. And the result is that water is going to leave the cells and move to its lower concentration outside of the cells. This results in cell shrinking. This is what we call crenation in animal cells. So a cell in an isotonic situation. Red blood cell. Solute concentration is equal inside and outside of the cell. Therefore, there's no net movement of water. It moves both ways because the concentration of water is the same on both sides of the membrane. So this is isotonic. So the solute concentration is equal inside and outside. So the water concentration has to be equal inside and outside. The water is still moving. It's just not moving in any given net direction. It's moving both ways equally. When a cell is placed, when a red blood cell is placed in a hypertonic solution, meaning that the solute concentration is higher outside than it is on the inside, water is going to leave the cells because the concentration of water is higher outside of the cells. So water leaves the cells. I think I may have said that wrong. Let me say it one more time. The solute concentration is higher out here, so the water concentration is lower out here than it is inside the cells. So water will leave the cells. And what results is that the cell shrivels. Now, my question for you is, we know a lot that structure is related to function. We know this, right? Seen this a couple hundred times. If I alter the structure of a cell by having it shrink, the function is going to change too. And what was a functional cell before is no longer going to function right. That's why this is a big deal. It's a structure. It's also, water is very important to reactions. So if I start losing a lot of water, that's a bad thing too. It's altering how much water I have to work with to produce, to do certain reactions. It's also impacting, just the overall shape of the cell and its structure. I think this is going to take up the whole amount of time, but that is all right, because it means that we will catch up, because a lot of what we're covering today is in chapter 3. And so it'll be easier for us to think about when we get to chapter 3 too. So hypotonic. I put a cell into a hypotonic environment, which means that there's less solute outside than there is inside the cell. And if there's less solute outside of the cell, there has to be more water outside of the cell, resulting in water moving into the cell. And therefore the cells may burst or lyse. Any questions? This is a really important concept. So understand that if the solute concentration is less somewhere, the water concentration is higher there than it is somewhere else. So just a summary of this: isotonic situation, solute concentration is equal inside and outside of the cells. So the water concentration is equal inside and outside of the cells. So the water still moves, but it doesn't move there's not any net movement in or out of the cell. Net meaning the total movement. When we put a cell into a hypertonic situation, that means that the concentration of solute is much higher outside of the cell. And if the solute concentration is higher outside of the cell, the water concentration is less outside of the cell. And so water is going to flow out of the cell. And this results in the cell shrinking or crenation. Hypotonic, the solute concentration is greater inside the cell than it is outside of the cell. So the water concentration is less inside of the cell. So water is going to flow from the outside of the cell down its concentration gradient inside the cell. We will cover this again briefly in about a week. And so work to get your head around it, but recognize you're going to see it again. And that will help if you're not sure about it right now. One more, kind of a review of this and comparing it to plant cells. Plasmolysis is what occurs in plant cells when they start to shrink. They have a cell wall, so it's just the membrane that shrinks. We don't have cell walls in animal cells. So in a hypertonic situation, the cells shrink. In an isotonic situation, the cells are normal. In a hypotonic situation, the cells, too much water moves into the cells and the cells lyse. Now, my question for you is, how does this explain preservation of beef jerky? Have any hunters in this group? Have you ever tried to make your own beef jerky?
You just use a lot of salt.
You use a lot of salt. Why do you use salt?
Salt will suck the moisture out of it and keep it preserved so that you could like basically store it on a shelf.
And this is Miranda, right?
Yes.
Miranda, this is osmosis.
Never thought of it that way.
So you've been doing it the whole time. If water is fuller, how does it move through the membrane? It moves through the membrane because it's small, and it also moves through the membrane through aquaporins. Now, here's some ideas for you. When someone is dehydrated, one of the fun things of dealing with the COVID is some people get very dehydrated. Why do we suggest that they drink Gatorade or Pedialyte?
Yeah, electrolytes and salt. Salt follows water.
It is, but you know what? The Gatorade and the Pedialyte have actually a lower solute concentration than your body cells do. And the reason we want it to have a lower concentration of salt is because it has a higher concentration of water, which results in the water from the Gatorade and the Pedialyte moving into the cells. So when you get dehydrated, your tissues start to shrink and shrivel. So when you take in a hypotonic solution, the water is going to start moving back into the cells and the cells are the ones that have lost the water. When someone is struggling with edema, the hypertonic situation will draw the water out of the tissues. So edema is when there's too much water in the tissues. So you give them a hypertonic solution. Remember, it has a hypertonic, meaning it has less water in it. You have them drink it or you give it to them in an IV. And it pulls the water out of the tissues, bringing the edema down. Any questions? Remember, hypotonic means that there's more water in this, because tonic, if you think of tonic as being the solute, hypotonic meaning there's more water in it. Hypertonic meaning there's less water in it and more solute. So a passive process forces water out of a vessel, capillary meaning a vessel, via the hydrostatic or fluid pressure exerted by the water. So water is filtered out of the vessel. Osmotic pressure forces it back in through absorption. So think of the osmotic pressure as being the pressure that is exerted by the solute to prevent water from moving into it and therefore pushing it back in. So this is the pressure exerted by this tissue to resist the outgoing water coming out, and therefore pushing it back in. So this gradient for filtration is a pressure gradient, pushing the filtrate from a higher pressure area in here to an outer pressure, to a lower pressure. This filtration occurs in the kidneys. It also occurs in the capillaries. Okay, so what if we want to push it the other way? We want to push it up the gradient. This has to occur through active transport, where there has to be a form of metabolic energy to push things the opposite direction. So we're moving them against their concentration gradient. And rather than having everything move from a high to a low, we're exerting a certain amount of energy to move things from a lower concentration to a higher concentration. If we think about that room with 25 people in that 7x7 room, this is the pressure exerted to move more people into that room. that's already got 25 people in it. So active transporters or solute pumps work by combining specifically and reversibly with transported substances that are moved against their concentration gradient with metabolic energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. A symport system moves the substances in the same direction. An antiport system moves two substances in opposite directions. So one substance is moved out while the other substance is moved in. We have two different types of active transport. We have a primary active where one solute is moved against its concentration gradient through the direct breakdown or hydrolysis of ATP. Spend a lot of time talking specifically about this hydrolysis in the next time we have lecture. Secondary active transport involves coupled systems where one substance is we have one substance that we're pushing it against its concentration gradient through, and so secondary active transport uses primary active transport to build up a concentration gradient over here. That is then used, then we use the movement of this sodium down this concentration gradient to pull glucose down its concentration gradient, or to move glucose from a higher concentration, a lower concentration here. We're moving this glucose, we're using this solute moving down its concentration gradient that we built up this gradient because of ATP. We build up the concentration gradient using ATP. And then we allow sodium to move down its gradient if it moves glucose with it against its concentration gradient. So the sodium is moving down its concentration gradient by pumping glucose against its gradient. That's the difference. So we have primary active transport where we build up concentration gradients. That we can then use to move other substances against their concentration gradient. So we build up a high concentration of sodium here. We move it down its concentration gradient. But we don't let it move unless it pulls glucose with it. And glucose is lower out here and higher here. And so it only can move, sodium can only move down its concentration gradient in secondary active transport if it pulls glucose with it. Or some other molecule. So primary active transport builds up concentration gradients. And then we use secondary active transport to allow things to move down the concentration gradient that we've developed by pulling other substances against their concentration gradient. Any questions? So these two processes move together. And they're often used together. The example that we saw here, this is a sodium potassium pump. An example of a sodium potassium pump is here, where sodium binds to a carrier in the membrane. ATP then binds to the membrane. The ATP is hydrolyzed, so it breaks down into one phosphate and one ADP, adenosine diphosphate. And this breakdown results in a change in the carrier shape or conformation that opens to the other side of the membrane. And the carrier opens to the other side and the sodium is released. The phosphate then comes off and potassium binds. Or let's say this first. The phosphate stays attached, potassium binds, the phosphate comes off, and when the phosphate comes off, it causes a change in the carrier structure, releasing potassium to this side. Look at this right now, but recognize that we'll go through these steps again in about a week. And in about a week, I'm going to ask you to remember the steps. But really, really quickly, one more time. Initially, the carrier is open to the inside of the cell, the cytoplasm. The sodium binds. ATP is hydrolyzed and a phosphate binds to the carrier. When this phosphate binds to the carrier, the conformation of the carrier changes, and now the carrier is open to the outside and the sodium leaves. Now that it's open to the outside, potassium binds to the carrier. The phosphate leaves. There's a conformational change when the phosphate leaves. And now the carrier is open to the inside of the cell, and the potassium is released. And it starts all over again, where now it's open to the inside, so sodium combined, like I did up here. So this is all through this is active transport, where there has to be ATP involved because we're moving things against their gradient. The concentration of sodium is lower inside the cell and higher outside. Potassium is lower outside of the cell and higher inside. So we're using this to create concentration gradients. Let me tell you, we do this a lot in physiology. And so the sodium potassium ATPase pump, this whole thing is the most famous pump. It's probably the best understood too. So in secondary active transport, we use that sodium potassium pump to create a concentration ion gradient. That then, using another carrier, we let sodium flow down its concentration gradient as long as it pulls glucose with it. So the pump stores energy in the form of potential energy. This is a potential energy store that we can use to move something else. So anytime that you have a concentration gradient or an ion gradient, that is a potential energy source that can be used to drive movement of other things. So we do this to create potential energy sources in the form of the sodium gradient and the potassium gradient on this side. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. This is easier. Once you understand the osmosis, this is an easier concept to get. So whether it is primary or secondary active transport, each of these pumps or carriers only transport certain substances. The substances have to have the right structure to be able to bind to the carriers or be able to, or even with the channels, they have to be small enough. But in this case, they have to be able to bind to the carriers or the pumps. This allows a cell to be very selective as to which substances are allowed to move right through the membrane, or which substances are allowed to move through a channel. Some other forms of active transport, and I'm trying to remember if we've talked about this or not, is when things are moved via vesicular transport, which has to be mediated by receptors. Exo means to exit the cell. Endo means to enter. Cytosis that wasn't what I meant. Cytosis means cell. So exocytosis is to exit the cell. Endocytosis is to enter the cell. you see it? Yeah. Oh, of course it went from the very beginning. Really? So this is where there has to be a change in the structure of the membrane to move things in and out. And those changes in the structure have to be actively use energy to be changed. The only way the structure can be changed is via ATP here. So we can have exocytosis where things are leaving the cell. We can have endocytosis where things are entering the cell. We can have intracellular vesicular trafficking. If you remember, we have lots of different organelles in the cell. So intracellular vesicular trafficking is where things are moving from one area of the cell to another area inside the cell, all within the cell. So intra meaning in the cell. Like active sodium pumping, this has to be energized via ATP. Every once in a while, we use GTP, which we may or may not talk about very much. Adenosine is a nucleotide that's used in DNA. Guanine is also a nucleotide that's used in DNA. Both of these are used to make some form of energy, which is ATP or GTP. But with this in mind, remember, anytime you've got a vesicular transport occurring, this is an active transport because you have to use ATP to allow it to occur. You have to use some form of energy for it to occur. So exocytosis triggered by some sort of membrane receptor. Most of the time it involves a vesicle formation with a snare. Think of like a snare to catch something that interacts with another snare, a V snare, vesicle snare, a receptor called a snare, and a T snare is a target snare. And those two snares interact. When they interact, they make the membranes fuse. Make the membranes fuse, and the substances are released. So there's docking when the snares interact, and then the material's released. It could also be what's a kiss and run process where the membranes don't actually ever fuse. They just dock. This is the way that hormones are secreted, neurotransmitters, the signals between neurons, mucus secretion, and the ejection of waste occurs, is this exocytosis. Endocytosis, meaning bringing something into the cell, can occur through two different ways. We can have clathrin-coated vesicles, or we can have non-clathrin coated vesicles. So the membrane, so this is bringing stuff into the cell. The membrane has these coat proteins that bind to it and force it to deform, bringing in substances, these little cargo molecules, bringing in substances. The vesicle then pinches off from the membrane. So this is inside of the cell, this is outside of the cell. Pinches off, the proteins are removed, and the vesicle then can go wherever it wants it within the cell, wherever it's supposed to go. This little vesicle is called an endosome. Ultimately, of the endosome, the receptor and the membrane proteins and the coat proteins are actually, let's say this is the endosome. I apologize. This is the endosome. Ultimately, the endosome's contents are recycled back to the plasma membrane. And those contents can be combined with the lysosome. And a lysosome is, remember, that's kind of the stomach of the cell that digests whatever came in. Or it can be transported completely across the cell and released by exocytosis. We call that transcytosis. This last one, transported completely across the cell and released to the other side of the cell. It's what we call transcytosis, which we'll see, I think, on the last one of the last slides. So 3 types of endocytosis use clathrin-coated vesicles. Phagocytosis, remember, that's to eat big things. I don't know if we talked about that or not, but phagocytosis, phago means to eat, cytosis means cells, so this is to engulf really big substances. Just grab it. Pinocytosis is little tiny pinching, the little tiny drinking, not eating or engulfing, but just little tiny pinching. This is often called also fluid phase endocytosis because this is just pinching small amounts of fluid. And receptor-mediated endocytosis, which is where we have to have coat proteins involved. And there's a receptor that binds to a substance. This right here, do you guys remember what kind of microscopy this would be? What kind of microscopy is that? Is it light? Is it transmission electron microscopy, or is it scanning electron microscopy?
Transmission.
It's transmission. You're right, Aaron. It's transmission. Remember that the major factor involved that separates light microscopy from transition electron microscopy is resolution, being able to distinguish different details. That's one of your, I know that's going to come up most likely in the pool of questions that are on your lab quest. That's going to be one of them. So endocytosis using clathrin is involved in phagocytosis, pinocytosis, and receptor-mediated endocytosis. Non-clathrin coated vesicles are used in transcytosis. So this is when something is taken in on one side of the cell, transported to the other side of the cell, and released. And it uses what are called cavelin. So this is the only one that doesn't require a clathrin coat of endocytosis. Intracellular trafficking requires some proteins called codomers or COP vesicles. So this is where things are moved from one organelle to another. So this is the intracellular vesicular transferring. Last part. If you remember at the very beginning, we talked about transmembrane proteins on the plasma membrane. There are different functions of transmembrane proteins. We can have receptors, which bind to things like to bring something into the cell. Remember that receptor-mediated endocytosis. We also had that exocytosis too, where the snares were involved. We have enzymes that break down chemical messengers on the outside and also on the inside. We have channels that allow things to move in and out. This is most often just passive movement. We have gated channels that require that something binds to them to allow them to open or close. To allow things to move. We have cell identity markers. These are glycoproteins. Remember, these are always on the outside of the cell. And they act as cell markers, saying I'm this type of cell or I'm that type of cell. One thing that we'll learn a lot about, and I'm trying to think if we talk about it in this class or not, but these are how you determine blood types. People have different glycoproteins on their blood. And your blood type is based on what glycoproteins are found on your red blood cells. If you're A, you have a certain type of glycoprotein. If you're B, you have a certain type of glycoprotein. If you're O, you have neither A or B glycoproteins. And then there's one more called a negative or a positive, which is one more glycoprotein. And if you're negative, you don't have it. If you're positive, you do. So these are all cell identity markers that allow us body's own cells to distinguish itself from other cells. The last one, cell adhesion molecules that allow the binding of one cell to another cell. Oh, I have two more. Okay. Receptors and their ligands. So this is referring specifically to receptors. One special type of receptor, which we'll get into later this semester, are neurotransmitter receptors. They can work through two different ways. These receptors can open ion channels. The neurotransmitter binds to the receptor and allows a channel to open, and ions flow down the channel. Or the receptors bind and it starts a cascade inside the cell. So one opens channels, another one starts a signaling cascade inside the cell. But these are types of so a receptor, a neurotransmitter receptor, or any cell receptor, is a transmembrane protein. One more slide and then we'll be done here. Gap junctions. So these are similar to aquaporins or channels in that they're made between two cells and allow ions to flow or solutes to flow. They allow one cell to communicate with another cell. These are really important in heart function. They're finding out they're important in a lot of things, but the most famous example is heart function. Because if your heart, we've talked about this before, your heart is one complete muscle that contracts all at the same time and relaxes all at the same time. None of your other muscles do that. But all of the organs' muscles contract at the same time and relax at the same time. And this is because the muscle cells communicate between these gap junctions, saying, okay, we're going to contract, okay, we're going to relax. And you guys, that's the end. Are there any questions?
Nope.
Okay. So when we get to this, which it will come up in chapter 3, we'll all be pros. And I'll extend out the deadlines on the chapters, the chapter stuff on
Okay.
McGraw-Hill.
I have a question about like our chapter 2 practice. It isn't like in the McGraw-Hill right now. It's only chapter 3 practice. So I didn't know if
Let me put it up there. If it's not, I'll get it up there. Okay. Is it under a different week?
No, like it's in our like it's in the home base, the DCL or whatever, D2L thing. It's just when you click on it, it doesn't load. And then when I go to the McGraw-Hill, like the book itself, it just isn't there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the chapter
is that
3
the case for other people?
The chapter 3 is there and it's due October 4th, but the chapter 2 practice isn't there, but the quiz is. So I didn't know if like we're not to do it or.
Nope, you're supposed to do it. Give me 1 second. Let me look just for a moment here.
I'm pretty sure I know what he's talking about. It did that for me too. I clicked on something and it took me to chapter 3. And I was like, I don't think we're on chapter 3.
So when you click on this, it doesn't load?
No, it just
Yeah.
like it just times out. There's just a spinning wheel loading. And then when you go to the like the overview of the course itself on the McGraw-Hill like Connect book, it's not in the things to do.
So when you click launch here, it just gives you a spinning screen?
Yeah, there, it's not in our list when you go to the McGraw-Hill like class, like within that so the chapter 3 practice is there.
Eric, will you do me a favor and share your screen?
Yeah, hold on.
I'm
let me
sorry.
drag this
Share your
over.
screen and let me see, because you can see that when I click on it, I don't get what you get.
Share screen, desktop. Okay, so say I go to, can you see my screen?
Yep, I can.
All right, so we'll go to the week of 9/6. We go to chapter 2 practice. Launch, then you say begin, and that just never begins.
It never loads.
And then as like when that was happening, I wasn't sure why that was happening. So I looked at the overview on McGraw-Hill. You go to our class, you see everything. So you see all the assignments, but you only see chapter 3 practice. You see chapter 2 quiz, but not chapter 2 practice.
Do me a favor, Terry. Stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Stop sharing for 1 second here. Let me share mine. Now. Oh, I don't want you to see this screen. Don't look. Just for a moment, don't look. Oh, come on, don't look. All right, 1 second here. Okay, now you can look. So, what's the problem? Chapter 2 practice.
Your chapter 2 practice there says that it's not assigned.
Ah, seriously, Mary. All right, sorry, talking to myself. Give me a minute here.
Could I be excused?
Yes, you're excused.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
You're welcome. Okay, it should be assigned now, Terry.
Okay.
Let me know when you see it.
2 practice, and let's do, okay. Yeah, let me give it another shot now.
Continue.
Still not loading. I'm just going to restart D2L, go to week of 9/6, chapter 2 practice, launch. It's still not loading,
give me
but
one- give
I
me
saw
one-
you like assign it, so I
Yeah,
imagine if I like check
give me
back
one
in.
more second. Give me 1 more second. I was playing with it for a second. Changing the date on when it's due. Try it now.
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay, good. All right. I apologize about that one.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to, like, I was getting a little overwhelmed because like we weren't finishing chapter 2, but we had like chapter 3 assignments due before then. So I was
I
like,
understand.
yeah.
Okay, I understand. Have a wonderful day, okay?
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
You're welcome. Lakeisha, do you have any questions for me? Anybody waiting to talk to me?